What if I told you that Elmore, the chaotic cartoon town from the Amazing World of Gumball, might actually hold up as a real city? Now, I know that sounds impossible, given Elmore is a place where your teacher might literally be Lucy, your neighbor might be a balloon, and gravity breaks whenever the plot demands it. On the surface, Elmore looks like pure cartoon nonsense, but here's the twist. When we started to break it down, looking at resources, jobs, infrastructure, and even culture, Elmore started to look less like nonsense and more like a city that would actually survive. And honestly, that shocked me. This wasn't an easy question to answer. To figure it out, I had to dig into how real cities rise and fall, why some thrive while others collapse, and then test Elmore against those rules. It's the kind of deep dive that had me questioning whether Elmore is just a cartoon setting or a real reflection of what makes any city real. So today, we're going to pull Elmore apart piece by piece. The survival requirements every city needs, the risks that could wipe it off the map, and finally, whether its soul matters more than its skyline. If you're new here, I'm Zersol, and today, the question is whether Elmore could exist in real life, and by the end, you might never look at Gumball's world the same again. So, let's start at the very beginning. Could anyone actually live in Elmore? Not just show up for a gag, but genuinely survive there day after day? To figure that out, we need to go back to the fundamentals of human survival itself. For over 200,000 years, humans have depended on the same handful of essentials: oxygen, water, food, shelter, and safety. Our bodies are fragile machines operating within narrow margins of temperature, pressure, and nutrition. If Elmore were real, its citizens, no matter how bizarre they look, would need those same requirements to keep going. Oxygen comes first. Air is about 20% oxygen, and without it, our cells can't produce energy. Brain damage begins within minutes, and within about 10, unaliving happens. In Elmore, nobody ever seems short of breath, even Richard somehow. But in a real city, air quality and circulation would be non-negotiable. Too much pollution or bad ventilation, and the place would become unlivable fast. Next is water. It's the most vital resource of all. About 70% of the human body, regulating temperature, fueling chemical reactions, and protecting tissues. Without it, survival drops to just a matter of days. Elmore never shows us water treatment plants or pipelines, but if it were real, those systems would need to exist quietly behind the scenes. Without clean, reliable access, the city simply could not function. Food comes next. Macronutrients, carbs, and fats, they keep us energized, while proteins rebuild and maintain our bodies. In theory, humans can survive weeks without food, but eventually the body breaks down, and here's where Elmore feels the most fragile. Its food economy looks like pure chaos: fast food, cafeteria slop, and candy diets. It's hilarious in a cartoon, but in reality, that would lead to malnutrition on a city-wide scale unless farms, trade routes, or supply chains supported it. Micronutrients like vitamins and minerals are just as critical. Without vitamin C, you get scurvy. Without iron, anemia. A real Elmore would need markets, shops, and restaurants that provide a wide enough variety of food to keep everyone alive and functioning. Temperature is another make or break factor. The human body works best at around 37 degrees Celsius or 98.6 degrees American. Too hot and enzymes start breaking down, too cold and hypothermia sets in. Elmore looks like it exists in a mild temperature climate, but a real city can't count on cartoon consistency. It would need heating, cooling, and proper housing to deal with inevitable extremes. Cartoon logic makes its environment endlessly flexible, but in reality, elevation, seismic activity, and water access would all define whether the town could even exist without constant disaster. The real question isn't whether the characters are funny or bizarre, it's whether their world even supports the absolute basics of human life. Strip away the cartoon logic and it's clear. For Elmore to function like a real city, it would need to meet the same biological and environmental needs as any other place on Earth. Knowing that, Elmore's survival isn't entirely far-fetched. Take an episode like The Picnic. If you watch closely, you'll notice something subtle. The town isn't just random, it's connected. Residents can leave the dense urban core and reach rural forests and recreational spaces with ease. The geography, while played for laughs, hints at zoning that blends neighborhoods, roads, and green areas together. It's messy, but it's functional. If Elmore were real, that setup would demand highly adaptive zoning laws, flexible road networks, and clever urban planning to keep the balance between chaos and livability. And somehow, against all odds, that balance is exactly what keeps Elmore from collapsing outright. So, now that we've covered the raw basics of survival, let's move to a more pressing question. Why do some cities thrive while others fall apart? The answer usually comes down to how well a city handles growth, and whether that growth becomes sustainable or spirals into collapse. So, obvious next question, why do cities grow? Cities don't just appear out of nowhere. They expand and survive when they lay the right foundations. And believe it or not, even Elmore, chaotic as it looks, sometimes hints at the structures that make cities work. Take the remote. In that episode, the Watersons sprint through bridges, stairways, underpasses, and layered streets just to catch a runaway TV remote. What it reveals is that Elmore has surprisingly complex infrastructure. Multi-level streets, public pathways, interconnected transit routes, and mind you, this isn't just background art. It shows Elmore's urban skeleton is dense and connected, which is exactly what lets real cities grow. Infrastructure isn't glamorous, but it's the backbone of every thriving city. Without it, people and businesses scatter. Then there's agglomeration. Based off of this paper, which really provides much of the foundation for this video, agglomeration essentially means the clustering of businesses, services, and workers into a tight area. Elmore's downtown looks absurd, with banks next to hot dog stands next to who knows what. But the density actually mirrors real cities. Proximity means efficiency. Workers find jobs faster, businesses share suppliers, and customers don't have to travel far to get what they need. It's chaotic in style, but logical in function. Migration is another growth engine. People move where opportunity and safety exist. Elmore, with his bizarre but welcoming culture, could attract exactly the kind of misfits who would otherwise be shut out of more rigid cities. In that sense, Elmore really begins to partake a fictional version of Austin with its slogan, "Keep Austin Weird." Diversity of backgrounds, species, or shapes becomes a strength when it fosters resiliency and creativity. Technology and communication also matter. Elmore isn't technologically primitive. It has smartphones, computers, and even high-tech labs, though those often create disasters instead of solutions. Still, the point is clear. Elmore is connected to modern networks. That's crucial because a city that isn't plugged into the global economy stagnates. Even Elmore's chaotic embrace of tech suggests it wouldn't be isolated. And finally, government investment. Public goods keep communities stable, like schools, utilities, and emergency services. Elmore Junior High is proof of that investment. Education not only anchors families, but also provides long-term human capital, the kind of thing every successful city relies on. Pair that with a family-heavy demographic like the Watersons, and you've got the kind of steady population growth that helps a city persist across generations. So, on paper, Elmore has many of the ingredients for success, but ingredients don't guarantee the recipe works, because just as some cities thrive, others collapse. Economic decline is one of the fastest killers of urban life. History shows us that when industries vanish, entire populations scatter. Detroit's collapse after the auto industry shrank is the textbook case. For Elmore, the equivalent would be something like the Rainbow Factory shutting down. That single loss could trigger a domino effect. Jobs gone, businesses shuttered, families leaving, and since Larry essentially runs half the town's services by himself, Elmore's economy is already alarmingly fragile. Then there's environmental disaster. Nature doesn't care about city planning. Floods, fires, storms, and pollution can devastate populations overnight. In The Storm, Elmore is suddenly swallowed by floodwaters, with kids scrambling to survive. It's played for comedy, but beneath the absurdity lies a real truth. Cities only endure disasters if they adapt. Without resilience, emergency response systems, reinforced infrastructure, adaptive policies, Elmore could be one bad storm away from collapse. And beyond economics or disasters, there's the danger of over-urbanization. Growth isn't always positive. Without planning, infrastructure strains, inequality rises, and stability unravels. Elmore already feels stretched thin. An underfunded education department, chaotic zoning, and food systems with no clear foundation. A real city can't survive on improvisation forever. Ultimately, the fate of any city is a balancing act. Growth can create opportunity, but without the capacity to absorb that growth, opportunity turns into chaos. Elmore sits on a razor's edge here. Its infrastructure, economy, and culture hint at real urban viability, but they're so fragile that a single shock, an economic downturn, a flood, or even just Larry quitting all his jobs could push the city into collapse. That's what makes Elmore fascinating. On the surface, it's absurd, but when you compare it to real cities, the same forces are at play. Success and failure hinge not on whether a place is normal, but on whether it can adapt, sustain, and balance itself against constant challenges. And Elmore, for all its cartoon logic, might actually just be doing that. Given this balancing act, critics will say if growth is what makes cities thrive, then decline is what tears them apart. And Elmore sure has the capacity for decline. Now, decline isn't always dramatic. We like to imagine collapse as an apocalypse, one giant disaster that wipes everything away overnight. But history tells us it usually happens slower than that. Collapse is a process, not an event. Small cracks widen, systems weaken, and then suddenly the structure can't hold anymore. One of the strongest forces behind this slow unraveling is climatic stress. this. If a community is already fragile politically, economically, or socially, climate shocks push it past the breaking point. That's when survival tips into instability. Take a look at Rome. Droughts and poor harvests didn't topple the empire by themselves, but they made an already strained economy weaker and its armies harder to feed. That left Rome vulnerable to invasions it might have resisted in stronger times. The Maya faced something similar. Prolonged drought mixed with resource mismanagement eroded their urban centers until fragmentation replaced unity. Neither of these collapses happened overnight. They were long, grinding declines sped up by environmental pressure. And it isn't just ancient history. Venezuela relied heavily on oil revenue for decades, but when drought reduced hydroelectric power and food imports became harder to sustain, the economy spiraled deeper into crisis. The climate doesn't cause the collapse, it just accelerates the cracks that were already forming. Think of it this way: if a city is a table, then climate shocks are the hand shaking it. A strong table can withstand the pressure. A wobbly one eventually falls apart. So what does that mean for Elmore? Well, for all the quirky infrastructure and welcoming culture we've seen, Elmore is already fragile. It leans too heavily on a few businesses, has no visible disaster planning, and treats chaos as its normal state. That's funny in a cartoon, but in real life, it's exactly the kind of fragility climate shocks exploit. A single flood, drought, or supply chain collapse could ripple through the town faster than anyone could adapt. Additionally, overgrowth is just as dangerous. Expanding too fast, consuming too much, or building without sustainability sets the stage for collapse just as surely as famine does. Growth unchecked is really just decline in disguise. So, when we think of Elmore, or any society trying to exist in a chaotic, unpredictable environment, we have to ask the uncomfortable questions. What happens when disaster piles on disaster? Can the system bend without breaking, or will it crumble the way Rome, the Maya, and modern states under climate stress have? Now, between the balance between resilience and fragility, is Elmore a city that's on the cusp of a boom or a bust? Well, to get to the conclusion, we'll have to look at just one more layer of the city, the cultural one. When we think of a city, the first image that often comes to mind is the skyline. Towering buildings, iconic shapes against the horizon, glowing lights at night. Skylines are like the walls of a city, shaping its identity in the same way that portraits shape how we remember a person. A skyline can be a source of pride, beauty, and tourism. Just look at how New York's Empire State Building or Dubai's Burj Khalifa define not just their cities, but entire nations. Urban researchers even argue that skylines carry an aesthetic weight. People tend to prefer natural skylines, mountains, rivers, horizons, over artificial ones. And when it comes to buildings, proportions, height, and context matter. A skyscraper can either inspire or overwhelm, depending on how it fits into its environment. But here's the twist. A beautiful skyline doesn't guarantee a livable city. A skyline might bring tourists, but it can't fix food shortages. An iconic building might win awards, but it can't heal social division. The research reminds us that skylines appeal to our senses: sight, sound, scale. But a city's survival and meaning depend on deeper values: equity, governance, resilience, and shared purpose. Skylines appeal to the senses, but the true lifeblood of a city lies in deeper values. And this is where Elmore completely flips the script. By every conventional measure, Elmore has no skyline worth remembering. Aside from the backdrop of its mountains, there are no glittering towers, no monuments of ambition, no architectural icons. Judged by urban design standards alone, Elmore would fail the test of city identity. It lacks the body, and yet despite that, Elmore survives. It functions, and it even thrives. Why? Because what Elmore lacks in skyline, it makes up for in soul. Families like the Wattersons, social networks stitched together by unlikely friendships, and a culture resilient enough to withstand floods, chaos, and cartoon absurdity. Elmore's strength is not steel or glass. It's the shared identity of its people. This pushes us toward a deeper argument. Cities need both body and soul. Rome had monuments, but when its society fractured under climate stress and inequality, no skyline could hold it together. Modern megacities often chase towers higher and higher, but those towers can quickly become fragile monuments if built on shaky social foundations. Meanwhile, Elmore, ridiculous, chaotic, and skyline-free, reminds us that soul can sometimes be enough to carry a city forward. But that doesn't mean the lesson ends there, because a skyline without a soul is an empty shell, all image with no substance, and a soul without a skyline risks lacking ambition, infrastructure, or visibility in the wider world. The tension between these two forces, body and soul, isn't just philosophical, it's practical. It determines whether a city flourishes or falters. So, if we finally want to answer whether Elmore could actually exist, we need to think beyond survival requirements or growth patterns alone. We have to ask, can a city with no skyline but an abundance of soul not only survive, but sustain itself across generations? Now, before giving away the answer, I want to ask you guys, do you think Elmore could survive as a real city? Why or why not? Drop your thoughts down below because I genuinely want to see how you'd argue it. And since you've stuck with my ramblings this far, why not check if that subscribe button is real by, tapping it? Alright, back from that. Let's break it down once and for all. From everything we've looked at, Elmore could exist as a real city. Not just as a cartoon backdrop, but as a functioning community that meets the same requirements as any place on Earth. At layer 1, the physical layer, which is the most basic level, Elmore has the essentials for life. People eat, they drink, they breathe, and they have shelter. Sure, some of them are bananas or walking blobs of clay, but when you strip away the cartoon logic, the fundamentals are in place. The town clearly has access to clean water, food is circulating, even if it's fast food and cafeteria trays, and people have roofs over their heads. Survival in Elmore works the same as it does in any city. Meet the biological needs first, and everything else stacks on top. Now, layer 2 are the city systems. Beyond survival, a city lives or dies by its infrastructure, economy, and ability to grow. And here, Elmore surprisingly delivers. We've seen bridges, multi-level roads, and neighborhoods that keep the town connected. Shops, schools, and even factories provide jobs and keep the economy turning. Yes, even if Larry is basically single-handedly running it all. Migration? That's built into Elmore's DNA. It welcomes the weird, the strange, the outcasts, much like real-world cities that thrive on diversity. Agglomeration is there too. Businesses cluster together downtown, creating the same efficiencies we see in real urban centers. In short, Elmore doesn't just survive, it organizes itself well enough to expand. And finally, layer 3 is the social fabric. This is where Elmore really proves itself. Cities are more than pipes and paychecks. They're communities, and Elmore is full of them. Parks, forests, and public spaces connect people to the outdoors. Schools and neighborhoods form hubs of interaction. Families like the Wattersons and the absurd cross-species friendships that define the town show how social bonds hold the city together. People don't just live in Elmore, they want to stay in Elmore. That sense of belonging, that resilience in the face of absurdity is what makes it more than just buildings on a map. Now, of course, there are counter-arguments. Elmore is chaotic, unstable, and sometimes on the brink of disaster. Natural hazards like floods or storms could easily destabilize it, and yes, without strong industries, the economy might feel fragile. But history shows collapse isn't usually sudden, it's slow. And Elmore's culture, adaptability, and sheer weirdness give it tools to bounce back in ways more rigid cities can't. Rome fell under drought and mismanagement. Modern megacities chase skylines without fixing inequality. Elmore, despite lacking a skyline, thrives because of its soul. So, when you put it all together, the verdict is clear. Elmore checks the boxes. Physically, it has resources. Structurally, it has systems. Socially, it has the culture and cohesion that actually make cities work. By these standards, Elmore could exist as a real city. It might not be glamorous, it might not be efficient, but it would be alive. And in the end, that's what makes any city real. And there we have it, a deep dive into Elmore, examining how a chaotic cartoon town can still reflect the core elements of real-world cities. From survival basics to growth, decline, and the balance between soul and skyline, there's more to this town than meets the eye. So, if you enjoyed exploring the hidden logic, urban planning, and the quirky lessons buried in your favorite cartoons, make sure to hit that bell icon as I break down worlds, both real and fictional, so you can see the surprising ways they mirror our own reality. Stick around, because next time, we might just take another animated world and put it through the same test. And if you can't wait until then, check out these other videos right here. They dive into the same kind of hidden logic behind your favorite shows. You'll definitely find something worth binging.